So I want you to picture this. I'm at my parents' house for our regular Wednesday night dinner, and I'm 32 years old at the time. And I think it's about time that I tell my parents this deep, dark secret that I've been holding on to for 32 years. Okay, I've already discussed it with my wife previously for the months before that, and we figured out what we were going to say, and I was going to do all the talking. So picture this, we're at my parents' dining room table, the one that I've sat at all my life, in the same spot that I've sat in all my life. And there's my mom and dad, and my 4-year-old daughter, and my wife. And I wanted to wait until my daughter had got done eating, because she would then get up and go to the room to play, and then it would be time to talk. Well, I was nervous as hell. More nervous than I am right now. But still nervous nonetheless. And I remember sitting there, and my mom would ask, "Why aren't you eating very much?" which was unusual for me, because I kept pushing the broccoli around the plate with my fork. So finally it got time to talk. My daughter had left the room, and I finally got enough courage, or whatever it was you needed, to say this. And I said, "Mom, Dad, there's something I have to tell you. Beth and I are getting a divorce. And it's because I'm gay. But there's good news. She's also pregnant with our second child." So it wasn't funny at the time. Okay. But looking back on it, it kind of reminds me of like a Saturday Night Live skit, right? And I picture Seth Meyers playing me because he's cute. Okay? So I didn't know how my parents were going to react, because growing up Catholic, a devout Catholic family, and being a devout Catholic myself at that time, you couldn't be gay, you couldn't talk about gay stuff, and it was pretty much non-existent in my family. So my parents looked like they were shocked, of course, right? So they look over at my wife as if asking for some sort of confirmation, and she goes, "Yeah, it's true." So immediately my mom put her head on the table, which I've never seen her do before. Okay. Then she stood up, threw her hands in the air, burst into tears, and ran to the back room. My dad sat there in silence. I was their only child, and I had just thrown 3 huge bombs in their laps. Right? One of them was pretty good. The rest of them not too good, I guess, in their eyes. So I got up from the table to kind of decompress, and I went to the room where my daughter was playing, and I played with her for a moment. My dad came in, and he said, he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "We just want you to be happy." Wow. And it was thank you. However, my mom didn't feel the same way at the time. Eventually I left right after that, because I wanted to let them process the information they just heard. And I went home, decompressed myself as well. Let me see where I am. It wasn't a very positive experience, as positive as I was like for it to be, but I did get a lot of weight lifted off my shoulders, and I was able to finally be free of that secret that I had had for all those years. So let's fast forward a few months. I'm now officially dating my now husband, Jonathan, who's sitting over there in the corner probably crying. And so I asked my parents, I said, "Hey, I'd like for Jonathan to come to family events, birthdays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, that kind of thing." And they said, "Absolutely not, he's not invited." I said, "Okay." I was kind of pissed about that, because my straight cousins and people in my family could bring their significant others, but I could not bring mine. I even had a lesbian aunt who, rest her soul, who had long-term female roommates who who I later found out, were her girlfriends. Okay? Those female roommates were allowed to come to family events just as long as you didn't call them her girlfriends. So there's that big, huge elephant in the room. You don't call it an elephant, you call it a giraffe, and everything's great. Right? So then, there was one Thanksgiving. I told my parents I'd finally had enough. I said, okay, I'm not going to come around anymore until Jonathan is invited as well. And so I did. I didn't go around, and it was extremely hard to do. And there was one particular Thanksgiving that I did not attend, and that same lesbian aunt outed me to the whole family. What the hell? That's not your information to give. But, and she also took me to the side at one point and tried to talk me out of coming out of the closet. And said, you don't want to do that, you're going to ruin your family. Who says that? Especially if somebody identifies as lesbian, right? Well, we were on good terms at the end. She passed away in May, and I was able to do her funeral because she asked me to do that and presided over it. So we were in good terms at the end there. But for a while, I was like, well, what is that about? So my parents must have missed me because one particular Christmas, they called a couple days later and they asked for Jonathan and I to come to dinner and sit at that same table that I just told them a few months before all that terrible news. And I was a little nervous at first because I didn't know how my mom was going to react. I thought she might be offensive or nasty to my boyfriend, but she wasn't. Everything went really smooth, and I could tell they really tried hard to make a nice dinner. They cooked steak and vegetables and a nice dessert. However, they didn't know that Jonathan doesn't eat beef. So he politely picked around the beef on the plate and ate the vegetables. But my parents started to really accept him at that time. Growing up in the 1980s and early 1990s, I know I look young, right? There was no gay role model for me to look up to, especially not my family, right? There was no Ellen, there was no Will and Grace at that time, and so I took all those non-hetero feelings that I had, and I was really good at three things. I was good at denying them, I was good at repressing them, and I was good at suppressing them. So I would push them all the way in the back of my head and lock them away with a key. Not to think about them ever again until I saw another cute boy and then they popped up again, right? It wasn't until years later that I had met a cute young guy who identified as gay in church of all places, who really started helping me to figure out my gayness and helped me to accept myself for who I was. And my friend Derek is one of my best friends now to this day. He's sitting over there. But after I came out, I vowed to myself to always try to be there for folks who identified as LGBT and had nobody else to talk to about those feelings, because I had nobody else for a very long time. Let's fast forward 6 months after I came out to my family. I got a job at the VA hospital as a psychotherapist. And it was right around the time that the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was put into effect. And I had been asked to create the first ever LGBT veteran healthcare program in our region. It was actually one of the first ones in the country in the VA hospital as well. And it's been going strong for about 5 years. Incidentally, the last 2 years, we received a 100% score on the Human Rights Campaign Healthcare Equality Index for the VA hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. It was the only hospital in Louisville last year to get a 100%, and the only one of 5 hospitals in the state of Kentucky to get a 100% for the equality and diversity in the hospital setting. So I started working with folks, LGBT veterans, to help them really figure out who they were and who they are and accept themselves. So there was one particular veteran I worked with who was in the Navy, and worked during the pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell time. This was a time that if anybody in the military thought you might be a little bit not so much straight, you would be discharged dishonorably, no questions asked, you're gone, boom. He worked in the human resources, and he was in charge of typing up the DD-214s, which were the discharge paperwork for the military folks when they were let go of the military. While being gay himself, he had to type up the dishonorable discharge for those folks who were let go because of their sexual orientation, and he had to type at the bottom, admitted homosexual or homosexual tendencies. Those were the words you had to put on there. So I have worked with him over several years to really accept himself and become who he really is, and get rid of those repressed feelings that he had all that time. There was another veteran that I worked with who was assigned female at birth, and when he was watching the Diane Sawyer-Bruce Jenner interview 2 years ago, he pointed to the TV screen and he said, "That's me. That's who I am." And so at age 69, I was able to help him transition to the gender he has felt he always was. I even started my own private practice last year, solely devoted to working with folks with LGBT issues and folks that needed any sort of sex therapy. So I think over the past several years, I've lived up to my vow that I made to myself to really help those folks to become more authentic versions of themselves. And I still have Wednesday night dinners at my parents' house. And Jonathan, who my kids call Johnny, attends as well and sits right next to me. And my son and daughter are there as well. And they also fix Jonathan chicken and pork now. Okay. And my ex-wife, if it's a special occasion, she will show up as well. I really don't know what happened to change my parents' mind. At this point, I don't really care. I'm just glad it did. I'm also very glad that now everyone is invited to the table. Thank you all very much.